which is mainly consists of 17th century. A little bit of we should take a little bit of the from the end of the 16th century and a couple of first decades from the 18th century maybe, but it's like a fat version of 17th century. Basically, it's a Baroque era. Usually, we treat Baroque era as some era, some time of backward thinking, of underdevelopment of science, and so on and so on. In contrast to, for instance, Renaissance period and Enlightenment period, the Age of Reason, the 18th century. I think it's wrong. For instance, I think that the 17th century Baroque era is an era of that goes backwards as far as science and knowledge are concerned. It's mainly based on two simplifications. One simplification come from the concentration of the historians' attention on the Catholic Church, which made the last attempt to regain its influence in the last part of the 16th century, because it wanted to fight Protestantism and heresy, what they perceived as heresy, and they made some considerable success after the Tridentine convent and so on. So they have made some progress and they have regained some influence, of course, but it's not always backwards. Some elements in Catholic world were far more advanced and progressive than in the, for instance, I don't know, among Presbyterians, among Calvinists, and so on. So we must avoid simplification. The other simplification, which usually tells us that the Baroque era is somewhat backward, as far as somewhat underdevelopment as far as science is concerned and knowledge is concerned, is the simplification which was made by Friedrich Nietzsche. Friedrich Nietzsche has divided all the eras to two groups. One group is the Dark Ages, and the other are Light Ages. And the Light Ages is, of course, the ancient times, according to Nietzsche. The other is, of course, Renaissance period and the Enlightenment period, and maybe his own times, which were something which we call today age of industry, or sometimes age of, I don't know, positivism, and so on. And the Dark Ages would be, according to Nietzsche, of course, the Middle Ages, the Baroque era, and the Renaissance and Romanticism. Okay, so I agree totally with Nietzsche as far as Middle Ages are concerned. Of course, all the inventions made by the Middle Ages were in fact Chinese and so on, and or some on the Greek, the ancient Greek or ancient Roman, and they were only a little bit expanded, a little bit modernized but Middle Ages were not really very creative. And of course the universities were created then, but we know that in every era the whole development of human knowledge and science was made not at the universities, and it's not made on the universities also today. Universities are always counter the new knowledge, always anti-new knowledge. So, and it was in the Age of Enlightenment when you had to gather yourself in academias, because the university was so very scholastic and so on. The same was in Baroque era, the same was in Renaissance period. And so no difference here. But there's a huge difference between Renaissance period and Baroque era. In Renaissance period, all enlightened minds were very solitary. They were grouped in very small academias that consisted from some I don't know, 5 or 10 people or something. Usually it was some clubs of mutual adoration and so on. For instance, Michel de Montaigne, the author of his essay, he was his essays, and in his essays he always complains, he frequently complains over the solitude he is in, solitude he lives in, that he's apparently a genius, and he has he has always almost no one to talk to. Huge difference in the 17th century, in Baroque era, science was very much advanced. The Baroque era is the era of creation of the Royal Society. Also, it's the time of the creation of the what is called the French Academy, of course, established by Richelieu in 1642. It was also a time that we call sometimes the scientific revolution. It's the time of Galileo, the time of Newton, the time of Leibniz, who attempted to make that was the last almost successful attempt to make a general philosophy that would explain everything. Sometimes Leibniz is considered the last man who knew everything. Of course, he didn't know everything, but he was keen on so many things, from geology to literary things. And also the time of Anthony van Leeuwenhoek, which had his share in both of those aforementioned inventions. So so Baroque era is the age which made science popular, and always. Always it was something good to have a telescope or microscope. For instance, the Jesuits just pretended to make this, usually just pretended to have this astronomical observation to make astronomy, because it was fashionable. They wanted to be treated as serious modern men. And but some other orders were within the Catholic Church were indeed were really doing some science. So the Baroque era was the era that made science popular, and I think it's it could be the main argument that this era was very progressive, very modern indeed, and prepared the ground for Enlightenment. Renaissance, not so much. Baroque, indeed, and very much progressive, yes.